The year 2008 saw the release of Daniel Craig's second outing as James Bond, Quantum of Solace. While just as successful as its predecessor at the box office, the movie's profit margins were slimmer than usual, due in no small part to a massively inflated budget due to the Writers Guild strike, which wreaked havoc on the production. Rather than race into shooting another film, the choice was made to take their time crafting a worthy follow-up, one that would please both fans and critics, neither of whom were particularly pleased by Quantum of Solace, or so it seemed. To that end, EON Productions actually went to an A-list director this time, Sam Mendes, famous for having directed American Beauty and other acclaimed films. While nothing in his filmography suggested he could do a huge action movie, many were excited by the fact that he would sign on to a movie like this. It helped that he also had history with Daniel Craig, who'd famously played Paul Newman's cowardly son in his gangster epic Road to Perdition. Working with John Logan, who wrote Gladiator, in addition to the usual James Bond screenwriting team Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, the decision was made to both open up the James Bond universe by introducing Q, a very badass version of Miss Moneypenny, and other elements, but also scale things down to make it a deeply personal story in some ways, with the focus being razor sharp on the mother-son relationship between Bond and Judi Dench's M. In the film, her past would come back to haunt her upon the return of her former Golden Boy agent Silva, who's been horribly disfigured and is now a cyber terrorist. To play the part, Mendes and crew went to the best. Javier Bardem played one of the greatest villains of his era in the Coen brothers' classic No Country for Old Men. His Silva would be layered, with him obsessed with revenge against the mother figure that had forsaken him to China, mirroring the fact that the film starts with Bond himself having been quasi-betrayed and left for dead.
Let me hit Bond. Take the bloody shot!
And in fact, Bond is so upset that he's totally burnt out and living as a beach bum, only to return when MI6 is attacked. Once back, he meets Ben Whishaw as Q, as well as Ralph Fiennes as Gareth Mallory, who wants M to step down. The screenplay for Skyfall ranks as one of the better ones in the series' history, with some razor-sharp dialogue and an intriguing premise, even if Silva's master plan is ultimately forgettable. In the end, he wants revenge on M, and Bond has to protect her. It's a rather intimate story, but a pretty good one. So, where the film shines is really how all the elements come together. The cinematography, the cast, the score, the theme song, everything about Skyfall is just kind of perfect and blends together so well. And in fact, it would lead to the film becoming the most financially successful film in the franchise's history. So let's start with the cast. I think that Daniel Craig gives one of his best performances ever as James Bond in Skyfall. Well, I'd still say that probably his debut in Casino Royale is the most impactful, and he was robbed of an Oscar nomination for that role. I think that Skyfall is just as good in a lot of ways, and I think that he benefits from the fact that a director like Sam Mendes is there to kind of mold his performance. Daniel Craig does most of his own stunt work, so his role as Bond tends to be extremely physical, and often he hurts himself so badly that he's totally burnt out by the time it's over. Craig is famous after pretty much every Bond film by saying he'd never do another one, and he doesn't ever want to do another James Bond movie, and it's just too much. But you know, that's part of the game. And I think that part of that is just the fact that Daniel Craig throws everything he's got into the role. And I think that's what makes him one of the best James Bonds ever. And Skyfall is arguably his most polished James Bond vehicle, and I give his performance as Bond in this one a 9 on 10. I think he's great.
Where the hell have you been?
Enjoying death. 007 reporting for duty.
In terms of villains, you've got Javier Bardem as Raul Silva, who's been disfigured and was left for dead to be tortured by the Chinese by M and MI6. He wants revenge, and who can blame him? And Javier Bardem is probably the best actor they could have possibly chosen for the part. You believe him as a former MI6 agent, but you also believe him as a guy that's gone completely insane. He's got that great blonde hair in the film, and this kind of flirty manner with James Bond. In fact, I love their opening scene together. You feel like Silva doesn't really have it in for James Bond. It's just, you know, a victim of circumstance, and in fact I think he sees a little of himself in Bond in this film. Bardem is really terrific and one of my favorite James Bond villains ever. And in fact, in terms of chronology, I'd say he's probably the best villain the franchise had since Sean Bean as 006 in GoldenEye, because there's a long stretch of James Bond films where the villains aren't all that much to write home about. I give his villainous performance a 9 on 10. The Bond girls in this movie are a little bit different. There's Berenice Martel as Severin, who's Raul Silva's associate and mistress, but she's really kind of a secondary Bond girl in this film. Of course, her and James Bond do have kind of a sexy shower sex scene, but she's done away with pretty quickly, and I think that James Bond's reaction to her death is extremely cold-blooded, and in fact rubbed me the wrong way a little bit when I saw the film.
What do you say to that?
It's a waste of good scotch.
The main Bond girl arguably is Naomi Harris as Eve, a field agent, but of course she turns out to actually be a really badass version of Ms. Moneypenny, as she's this field agent who decides to take a step back and become M's assistant at the end of the film.
Well, my name's Eve. Eve Moneypenny.
I look forward to our time together, Miss Moneypenny.
In some ways, what's really crazy about this is that the main Bond girl is actually Judi Dench's M, as she's the one that he ends up with at the end and is trying to protect. Sure, there's no romance between the two of them, but the mother-son surrogate relationship is stronger than ever in this film. So, if you count Judi Dench as a Bond girl, well, she's one of the best ever, right? So you have to give him a 10 on 10. I mean, Judi Dench is great.
It's not very comfortable, is it?
Are you going to complain the whole way?
Oh, go on then, eject me. See if I care.
The rest of the supporting cast in this movie is wonderful. Q finally makes a comeback in this movie, even though there's not much in the way of gadgets. Ben Whishaw, who of course would become famous in his own right for voicing Paddington, is a great Q, and I really love him in these movies. He's young and edgy, and he regards Bond as kind of this dinosaur, even though they're not that far apart in age. I really like him in the part, and he feels like the first person since Desmond Llewellyn to try and actually make the role his own. As much as I like John Cleese as an actor, with R, he was always just kind of imitating Desmond Llewellyn or doing shtick. Whishaw is actually playing a real role.
A gun and a radio. Not exactly Christmas, is it?
Were you expecting an exploding pen?
Ralph Fiennes also makes his debut in the series as Gareth Mallory, who would later on become the new M. And I think one of the things that I got the biggest kick out of in this movie was when James Bond walks into M's office at the end. It looks like something out of a John Glenn James Bond movie from the 1980s, right down to the padded door. I got a big kick out of this, and I think that Fiennes is great because he does make the character sympathetic, even if it's not quite the surrogate parental relationship that Daniel Craig would have with Judi Dench. I think it's more of an M-like relationship and makes it more of a classic James Bond franchise formula pick in some ways. I really like him in the part.
Good luck, 007. Don't cock it up.
One of the characters in the film that I get the biggest kick out of, however, is Albert Finney, who plays Kincaid, the gameskeeper of the Skyfall estate, which belongs to James Bond's family. Now, a grumpy Scottish gameskeeper, you have to think that this role was written for Sean Connery, right? I mean, how great would it have been for Sean Connery to come in as this grumpy old mentor for James Bond? And what a great swan song it would have been, but alas, it was not meant to be. And if you had to cast somebody else, well, personally, I would have gone for Roger Moore, even though he probably can't do a Scottish accent. But Albert Finney, Albert Finney, if you look at him when he was young, could have easily played James Bond, and I imagine he had to be on EON's list at some point. Of course, it would turn out to be one of Albert Finney's last ever roles, and I really always loved him as an actor. So it's a nice swan song for him too, as Kincaid. And I love the fact that he calls M Emma in the film.
M, this is Kincaid, gamekeeper here since I was a boy.
Pleased to meet you, Emma.
One of the things now that a lot of people complained about in the film was that David Arnold was replaced by Sam Mendes' favorite composer, Thomas Newman. And in fact, I was a little bit upset by this originally too, but I don't actually mind them kind of fooling around with the musical formula somewhat. In fact, I'm quite excited about the fact that Hans Zimmer is going to be scoring No Time to Die. Newman actually does a pretty good James Bond score, and I like the romantic themes in the film, probably more than the action themes. He does a good job, but man, the theme song by Adele, Skyfall, I mean, this thing was a juggernaut when it came out. Not only did it win an Academy Award, but you could not turn the radio on without hearing it. It really, I think, helped the film's box office go straight into stratosphere. And, good on Adele. And I think it helped make her a megastar as well, even though, it was already pretty famous before the movie got released into theaters. It's kind of a great song, isn't it? In addition to the theme song, I think the other thing that was probably the most acclaimed about this movie was the amazing cinematography by Roger Deakins. No James Bond movie before or since has ever looked as good. Roger Deakins is probably the greatest cinematographer in the world, and wow, did he a great job. It blows my mind that he was only nominated for cinematography and didn't win, but it also goes to show that the Academy has always had a bit of a prejudice against action films, haven't they? Some of Roger Deakins' shots in this movie are absolutely gorgeous, especially the fight between Bond and Patrice in Shanghai. I mean, what an amazing moment. And it's worth noting that this is the first James Bond movie that was ever partially shot for IMAX screens. Now, it didn't get the full IMAX format, which is too bad, and I'm still really waiting for a James Bond movie to actually do that. But if you went to see it on an IMAX screen, the aspect ratio, which was 235:1 in most prints of the film, actually expanded to about 178:1. It's pretty cool. Mendes' direction, of course, also can't be faulted here, although I always kind of thought that he adopted somewhat of a Christopher Nolan vibe in the film, especially the big attack on MI6 feels like something out of The Dark Knight, right? I liked some of his ideas in the movie though, especially using the Animals 1964 cover of John Lee Hooker's Boom Boom in the big assault at the end. Now, some people have criticized the film for being kind of an Home Alone type home invasion thriller, but I mean, I love that, you know? James Bond, home invasion thriller, I'm on board. And I think it was so popular that it helped influence Rambo Last Blood to kind of make that also kind of a home invasion thriller in the climax. It didn't work quite as well there as it does here. Now, the movie was a box office juggernaut, it has to be said. In fact, it earned $1.1 billion worldwide, and at the time it came out, it was the highest grossing film worldwide for Sony Pictures, who was distributing the franchise at the time, and the second highest grossing film of 2012. It was really rare at that point for James Bond movies to make that much money. They always kind of plateaued at about $176 to $180 million domestically. In North America, the movie earned over $304 million, and the highest grossing James Bond movie of all time. Now, of course, some of you are asking that if adjusted for inflation, would Skyfall still be as popular? In fact, this would actually outgross the other most popular James Bond movie of all time, Thunderball, because if you adjust that movie for inflation, it made $1.047 billion, whereas Skyfall made $1.1 billion. So it's a thin margin, but Skyfall wins. And in fact, critics and fans raved about the movie non-stop. The movie got an A cinema score, which was pretty amazing for a James Bond film, and 92% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, which was really high. People really loved this movie, and a lot of people at the time were calling it the best James Bond movie ever. Now, I don't agree that it's the best James Bond movie ever, but I think it's a really, really good one. I still probably prefer Casino Royale by a slim margin, but Skyfall is just about as good a James Bond movie as we're likely to get anytime soon, so I give it a 9 on 10. In fact, Skyfall is so good it couldn't be helped that the follow-up would be seen as a bit of a disappointment by people, because the highs that we reached in this movie were so epic that, well, even if you did a movie after this that was very successful, it would be seen as not successful, just because Skyfall was such a juggernaut. The only way that Spectre, which would follow the movie, would be seen as successful is if it blew past the expectations that we had thanks to Skyfall, which of course it couldn't do. It's weird because the Daniel Craig Bond movies, in a lot of ways, are the opposite of the Star Trek movies. Remember when everybody used to say that the even-numbered Star Trek movies were really great? Well, in this universe, it's odd because it's always the odd-numbered Daniel Craig movies that are really good. And of course, Spectre wouldn't be quite as good as Skyfall. But is it as bad as you remember? We'll talk about it in the next installment of James Bond Revisited. If you like this video and you like the James Bond Revisited series, make sure to click on the bell to receive notifications every time we post a new video. We're an independent company, and you know what? We appreciate all of your support.